Detective Archive.
The small town of Villisca, Iowa, has become a ghost town. Half the houses are empty, the population has halved in 100 years. The only local landmark is a house at 508 East 2nd Street. This small estate in the style of country Gothic offers tourists a unique service. For $400, anyone can spend the night at the site of a mass murder. In 1912, 8 people died here, 2 adults and 6 children. All of them were killed with an axe, and none of them ever woke up. The killer did not take any valuables. The crime has not been solved to this day. But if this is the one who is suspected, then everything is even crazier than just an attack by an unknown psychopath. The evil irony is that the murder occurred on Children's Day. On June 9, 1912, the Moore family, businessman Josiah, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, were at the Presbyterian Church. The city of Villisca was celebrating Children's Day, and for the Moores it was an important day. Sarah, passionate about philanthropy, had organized a mini festival with refreshments, performances, and dancing. It was all innocent. Children danced on stage and performed scenes from the Holy Scriptures, and as a guest of the program, the townspeople were treated to an Anglican pastor, George Kelly. A most extraordinary gentleman, he had come all the way from Britain and traveled through the American countryside in search of divine revelation. In fact, itinerant pastors were not such an uncommon thing in those days. Kelly finished his sermon, and everyone gradually dispersed to their homes. 2 other girls, friends of their 10-year-old daughter, Catherine, went with the Moores to 508 East 2nd Street. They wanted to spend the night, and their parents let them go. The family was known throughout the city. They were philanthropists and quite pleasant people, if a little arrogant because of their wealth. The whole group returned home at about 10 in the evening. The next day at 7 a.m. their neighbor Mary Packham came to the Moores' house. She was used to them getting up early. Mary knocked on the door, no one answered, and it was locked. She decided that the Moores had gotten up even earlier than usual and had gone somewhere in a hurry. She was a very caring and pleasant woman. Just in case, she fed their chickens and reported the strangeness to Josiah's brother Ross. Out of politeness, he knocked on the door and, after waiting a little, opened it with a spare key. According to Mary's surviving words, a scream was soon heard from there. Ross screamed, even yelled. He ran out of the house gray as death and immediately ordered Mrs. Packham to call the local sheriff, Henry Horton. The town did not even have a police force as such. It had been such a quiet and sleepy place up until that moment. Horton had been elected as a representative of the authorities because he was a serious, tough man who had seen a lot. But he, too, felt ill in the Moores' house. The investigators who arrived felt ill, too. There were 8 corpses inside: Josiah, Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 of their daughter's friends. All had been killed by a blow to the head with an axe. The axe, by the way, was standing in the living room, leaning neatly against the wall, like a tool awaiting new work. All had been killed right in their beds, and in such a way that they had not had time to wake up. They lay with their skulls split open, without any signs of a struggle or even fuss. Only 12-year-old Lina, one of the friends, was lying across the bed, and her arm was injured, as if she had tried to defend herself. The heads of all but Josiah were smashed with the butt of an axe. His face was smashed with the tip of an axe. The unknown person killed everyone first, and then walked through the house again, hitting the heads of the dead again and again. And this only applies to the Moore family. The daughter's friends received only 1 blow each. Josiah's head was especially damaged. There was little left of it. The killer hit it for a long time and with fury. Surprisingly, no evidence was found, except for 2 fresh cigarette butts in the attic. Apparently, the killer waited there for the family to fall asleep before going downstairs, while away the time smoking cigarettes. But for some reason, the most memorable detail for investigators was Josiah's shoe, full of his blood, which the killer accidentally knocked over. The door was locked from the inside. No footprints were found under the windows. It was as if the killer had never gone outside. The investigation established that the crime was committed between midnight and 5 in the morning. According to the residents of Villisca, Reverend George Kelly was an extravagant man. He spoke strangely, conducted services strangely. Of course, he was English and a representative of the Anglican Church. And, as it turned out, he had serious mental problems. In his youth, he suffered a nervous breakdown, and as an adult, already being a pastor, he was accused several times of spying on women. It was also known that he tried to persuade parishioners to take nude pictures of him. Apparently, because of these incidents, he left his homeland, becoming a traveling preacher. It turned out that on June 10 at 5 a.m., just a couple of hours before the bodies were discovered at 508 East 2nd Street, Reverend Kelly suddenly left Villisca. He later began sending the town sheriff and the victims' families strange letters, obsessively trying to find out how the investigation was going and what the participants thought about what had happened. In 1914, the pastor was arrested in Washington for sending indecent images. Kelly began sending dick pics to women he barely knew long before it became fashionable. The investigation of this case led to a new charge. It turned out that George had raped a woman who came to work for him as a secretary. However, he was not jailed. The jury refused to believe that the Reverend could be a rapist, and he was sent to a mental hospital. However, not for long. The craziest thing, in 1917, 5 years after the murder, the pastor became of interest again. At some point, the sheriff and the Moore family's relatives simply ignored his letters, not even opening them, but in vain. It turned out that he hinted in them that he had heard a noise in the house and even, perhaps, had witnessed everything that had happened. Kelly was called in for questioning, and he calmly admitted that he was the axe murderer. However, the jury acquitted him again. The jury, just think about it, did not want to believe that a clergyman could be a murderer. He was released. There was no lynching. Pastor Kelly calmly went on to wander. A possible motive for the murder? The townspeople recalled that the Moore children had been misbehaving at the sermon that day, and Josiah had turned up his nose at the hobo pastor. And this after the fiery speech the Reverend had prepared for these ungrateful people. For most of the 20th century, the Moore's house stood abandoned and accumulated all the fears and creepy legends of local residents. In 1994, it was bought by enthusiasts Darwin and Martha Lynn, who repaired the house and its furnishings, bringing it to the appearance it had in 1912. The house became a tourist attraction. During the day, you can visit it as a museum, and at night, sleep here for a modest $400. It is not surprising that at one time the house was a popular place of pilgrimage for self-proclaimed mediums. A dozen different programs dedicated to the paranormal spent the night here, trying to film the ghosts or solve this case. Of course, to no avail. In 2016, the horror film, The Villisca Massacre, was released, in which Pastor Kelly is also shown as the killer, but according to the plot, he turns out to be possessed by a demon. Thank you all for watching the video. If you liked the story, like it and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.